So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 139th event of CIC since we were born in 2016. In fact, I was just taking stock of the number of book discussions and book releases that we had. This is the seventh discussion around books. We have two formats, a book release and a book discussion. This would probably fit into a book discussion format because the book has already been released in 2021. But notwithstanding that, and wearing the accountant's hat, 5% of our events is around books, so which is a good percentage to maintain. And more importantly, we thought that it will be good to inculcate the habit of reading books, which seems to be a dying phenomena in today's context. We have with us two very distinguished speakers, one moderator and one speaker. Mukund Padmanabhan is going to moderate this discussion on the biography on Chennai written by V. Sriram. And if I start introducing both of them, it will take 1 hour. I don't propose to do that. But what I'm going to do is just to set the context. I remember in 1960s and maybe early 1970s, if you watched the typical Tamil movie black and white in those years, the first scene would be Central Station, second scene would be LIC building, and then it will go on. So we were all very fascinated by those two pictures. And Sriram will go on to add his bit on how Chennai has evolved over a period of time. The third bit, as far as I am concerned, is Woodlands Drive-In, which is no longer prevailing today, but very unfortunately so. But Chennai has a very long and very distinguished history, captured in several forms and shapes. Sriram's book is going to cover it in a very, very wide 360-degree spectrum. First, I would like to introduce the moderator, Mukund Padmanabhan, who is a very seasoned journalist. His last hat that he wore as a journalist was editor of the Hindu. Before that, he was the editor of the Hindu Business Line. And currently, he is the visiting professor of Kreya University, one of the most reputed universities in Chennai. A prolific writer and a very distinguished speaker, a lecturer. He has a very long and distinguished career before him. And we're very fortunate to have him as a moderator for today's discussion on the Chennai biography. V. Sriram's resume ran to several pages. In fact, I took the liberty to ask him, I'm not going to go through it fully, but what is really important to capture is he has had the distinction of conducting these heritage walks around Chennai. I'm told 80 different routes he has captured of Chennai and capturing the essence and the historical perspective of the city. He has authored 25 books covering various industries, industrialists, several subjects. He runs his own business, a family business, a distributor of power equipments, and he also started a startup company on the technology space. So he wears multiple hats, but all of us know him as Sriram, as a writer, a historian, a lover of music. He's the secretary of Music Academy. So with these few words of introduction, I now hand over the proceedings to Mukund Padmanabhan, who will engage in a conversation with Sriram. And thereafter, we have allotted some Q&A from the audience. And finally, we will conclude the session. Over to Mukund Padmanabhan.
Thank you. Is this on? It's on?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anand, for that very flattering introduction. As you said, Sriram calls this book a biography, which I think is a pretty apt title, at least for two reasons. One, if it was called a history, it would be end up being, sorry, you can't hear me.
You have a column mic or?
It's called A Biography of Chennai, which I think is pretty apt for at least two reasons. One is that if you did call it a history, it would end up being called a micro-history, which is what histories of cities are sometimes referred to, cities, settlements. But I'd venture to say this is anything but micro. And I'm not just referring to the bulk of the book. I just think the canvas that you choose to paint this portrait of Chennai is just truly expansive. So the word micro doesn't really fit. And if you've read this book, you will see that he covers with sort of great painstaking detail a great range of things. There's politics here, there's industry here, there's sport here, there's cinema here, there's water here, there's even sewerage here, there's education, architecture, and so much more. Second, I think why biography suits this book more than history is that this is an attempt to explore the character of a city. more than tell a story in a linear fashion about the history of Chennai. And I think he sort of picks on what makes Chennai unique, what makes it what it is in a way. So it's really an exploration, if you like, rather like a biography of a personality of a city, an account of its strengths, its weaknesses, uh, and an examination of what the city is. And by virtue of that, I think it's also about an examination of who we all are, residents of the city. We all know Sriram as a writer, but I think we also know him as a sort of very lively, engaging, and infectious speaker, a sort of great raconteur. So I look forward to listening as much to you as everyone
Thank you,
gathered
Mukul.
here. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to start. I know that you go into great detail, so my questions are going to be of a somewhat general nature, and I hope you'll sort of flesh in,
Sure.
all the substantive stuff. So I'll start with the name because Chennai. You I think say somewhere in the book that Mr. Muthaiya would be somewhat displeased that you didn't call it Madras. So there's this considerable amount of debate about how Madras turned its name, and the theories sort of range. They range from, hey, it was named after a Portuguese, sometimes a church, sometimes a Portuguese official called Madre de Soa, or sometimes even it was named after a poor fisherman called Madras. And I've just read these range of stories. But what we know beyond doubt was that Madras or Madraspatnam existed before the British, before Francis Day and Andrew Cogan landed up
Yes.
on these shores almost 400 years ago. But I was struck by, I'm sorry, I know this is a long-winded way of asking a question, but I was struck by a couple of lines which is almost used in a throwaway manner, where you mention a stone inscription dating back to 1367, deciphered only a couple of years ago, which mentions Madraspatnam and other places nearby, ostensibly nearby, such as Neelangarai, Kovalam, and so on.
Neelangarayan Patnam.
Patnam, yeah. Now, if these references are to these places, and this is the one thing in your book, and I think if an ancient Indian historian confirms that these references were these places, then I think this piece of data is enough to conclusively prove that Madras is not of European origin at all, because Vasco da Gama, as we know, landed up only in 1498. So my question is, when we went from Madras to Chennai, did we just go from one Tamil name to another? There was no de-Anglicization as those who fronted this move suggested. Is that correct?
I would agree with you. I'd also say that it was eventually a choice between two very Indian names, as you very rightly mentioned just a short while ago, because Madrasapatnam obviously existed because the documentation, the grant says our town of Madraspatam. The Nayak is writing this. And therefore, it exists. He's not saying that you're going to create a new city called Madraspatnam where you're going to trade. He says our port of Madraspatam. If at all, the interesting thing is it appears that Chennapatnam was the one that was created because there is no mention of Chennapatnam in the grant. And it seems as though, the Madraspatnam occupied, first of all, I think one of the things that we need to realize is these were all very tiny hamlets. So today we are so conditioned by the fact that we live in a large metropolis. So because of that, we assume that this must have been a bustling town, but it wasn't. It was a tiny village called Madraspatnam where they created the fort. And behind the fort came up their Indian town, which was supplying all the services to them, the translators, the moneylenders, the betel nut suppliers, and everybody. That became Chennapanayakanpatnam or Chennapatnam. And eventually, it seems as though that the English continuously refer to the town as Madras, whereas all the Indian writing talk about it as Chennapuri or Chennapatnam. So even then, there appears to have been a very strong divide that in English it was Madras, and in the strangely enough in Sanskrit it is always referred to as Madrapuri. But Sanskrit writing is only from the 19th century onwards. It is not prior to that. There is no mention of this village. So it would almost appear as though there was a class of people who were comfortable with Madras, and then there was this other group of people who were comfortable with Chennai. Politically, obviously, it made sense to shift from there to here. And strangely, we all knew it even before. The city didn't change in any way because the name changed. Ultimately, it's the roads are the same, the drains are the same, the politicians are the same. Things haven't, moved one way or the other. But it's just that I guess, my children, for instance, they don't even know what is Madras. All they know is they talk of it as Chennai. So that's how we've got to learn and accept.
No, but when Anna changed Tamil Nadu to Madras, I mean Madras to Tamil Nadu, that was the argument used. We had de-Anglicization.
That's right.
So my point is, maybe
Yeah.
historically that's inaccurate.
And what I also think, as you very rightly said, the stone inscription, it's just received one mention. And there is this scholar who has spoken about it, but after that, we've not had
Silence,
complete
yeah.
silence.
Yeah,
So
maybe you should follow this up. I think.
it's very, I should, I
I
think.
think it's important. Okay, the expression oldest and first just runs through your book completely, and we have the oldest civic body. I mean, you mentioned that, but I think it'll boast it's the oldest after London, or the oldest continuing one after London. The oldest zoo, the oldest bookshop, the oldest railway station, the oldest railway company. The first Paleolithic tool was found here. The first court of, judicature was set up here. The first mutual fund is actually constituted here.
That's right.
The first Indian flight took off here. The first radiology facility, first successful bypass. I mean, you can just go on and on. For a city that has so many firsts, do you think we slipped a bit along?
I think it's more in our nature, where we are
To
always to think small. We don't think big beyond a point. It's this. We are always brought up with this "Siriha katti periha vaal." That is, think of yourself, and control yourself. And after writing all these corporate biographies that I have done, I've always had this question with several of them, and they've always come back to me saying, look, ultimately, I want to control my business. I don't want it to reach a stage where it becomes too big for me to handle. I am comfortable in this scenario where I am the king of all that I survey from my building. And beyond this, so it's consistently this reply has come. It's been in different words. Somebody said, we wanted to stick close to the knitting. We didn't want to get into things that we didn't know. But I guess that there is a certain element of conservatism in what we do. And that, I think, is overwhelming at the end of the day. And it's also, the other thing is, all these firsts and oldests, had it not been for somebody like Mr. Muthaya who compiled it and brought it out, we wouldn't have even known of these things, because we never took pride in any of this. And when he wrote about this Higginbotham's bookshop being the oldest, and Royapuram station and all that, I remember somebody who was reading that day's newspaper along with me, an elderly man, and I said, were you aware of it? He said, yeah, we knew about it all along. I don't know why Muthaya is writing about it now. But the point is that, in any other country in the world, they would have had entry tickets to come and view this place or some such thing. But here we don't bother about it. We just say, yeah, that's okay, let it go.
Yeah, you brought up this issue of industrialists, and I think you have a chapter called The Wheels of Commerce. In that, you suggest that maybe our industrialists, I'm not sure if we put it in these words or not, but perhaps didn't have the same appetite for risk as maybe some of their northern counterparts. Do you think this caution of conservatism has played out well in the long run? Are there any pros of this? We know the cons, of course, is not that much growth.
One is stability.
Okay.
And if you look at it over all these decades, we've ended up being an automotive capital. 1/3 of the country's automotive supply comes from here. Yeah. And we've not had any sensational collapses. The last sensational collapse was in 1906 when Arbuthnot and Company collapsed, and we are still dining out on it. Arbuthnot and Company, it failed, and then this company came out of it, this came out of it, this came out of it, and they've all succeeded, and they're all going strong even today. I think in some ways we never recovered from the shock of Arbuthnot and Company collapsing in 1906. But the point is that there is a great degree of stability in what is done in Chennai. We may measure our growth at 10% and 5% and 6%, but I guess that we have to give it to those people, that they've been managing at that level and they've been going along very successfully. They haven't lost out on anything. That would be, even I would think that way, frankly. Okay. My wife doesn't, I know.
I'm asking whether the city has lost out.
I don't know. See, today, if you look at what's happened to Bangalore, for instance, and look at this very recent article that came out on air pollution. where they say that yes, all the cities of India rank among the most polluted cities of the world, but it is Chennai whose air quality has not degenerated in the last 1 decade.
That would be because of the sea, right?
Not necessarily. Calcutta is not very far from the sea either, and it's dreadful. It's dreadful. You should just live there to know what it is. So the point is that we have, in the sense, there is a lot going for the city even today, in the sense that it is essentially very manageable.
Okay.
In that sense, I would say that there is something to speak of, that growth is not the only thing that we need to be looking at all the time. We need to also be looking at, in many ways, the quality of life, what the city stands for, its culture. And I think Chennai there has scored quite a bit. There's a balance between everything that happens here.
So to pick off on quality of life, I mean, you have 2 sections on water and sewerage right up there in front of your book, which is, a sort of unusual place for them, I thought. But I think, I imagine they're right up there because of the importance of the issues.
Yeah.
Reading them, and I just couldn't help feeling how some things never change about the city. For example, and I'm just going to read a bit from here. By the 1870s, the Kuam is already, you quote someone as saying, a foul and noisome place. Cesspool. Noisome, of course, here doesn't mean noisy, but it means smelly. And papers like The Hindu are writing about this from the turn of the century. And then you quote this wonderfully droll poem from a book of verses written in 1928, which ends like this, and I'm just going to read it. It says, "O viscid stream, O smelling flood, O green and beastly river, in short, you are the emblem of a real Madrasi liver," which I thought was really clever. Now, this is amusing, but it's also sobering in a way, because when we talk of cleaning our waterways, are we trying to fix a problem that's almost 200 years old?
It is, very sadly. And just to go back, I know where you came from, because you said, what quality of life when, we are struggling for water all the time, when we've got a smelly river going by the side of our city, or 3 smelly rivers, so to speak. The point here is, I would just like to compare it with a city like Delhi or a city like Calcutta, both of which I am very familiar with, because I spent significant number of years in both the places. Delhi has got the Yamuna flowing next to it, and Calcutta has got the Ganga. And yet, both of them are perennially struggling for water because of the pollution that they've managed to let into both the rivers. So this is a pan-Indian phenomenon. In this, there is very little that we can do as a city, because it's our attitude. Everybody here refers to all the rivers of the city as the Kuam. And if you ask them as to who pollutes the river, they'll say, எல்லாம் அப்படிதாங்க, அரசாங்கம் அப்படிதான் இருக்கு, politics இப்படிதான் இருக்கு, industries-ல இருந்து கொட்டுறாங்க. It's everybody except me who's polluting the river, and I'm forced to live with it. So this, I think, is a very pan-Indian phenomenon. It's just not here. So that, in my view, has to be taken as a given, that we do maltreat the environment as a nation, and we don't have any respect for it. And therefore, unless there is a complete sea change in our attitudes right across, this is not going to change. But I agree with you entirely on the water, because there I do feel that a lot could have been done, particularly by those who even today can do something about the water. For instance, take this entire rainwater harvesting, such a phenomenal step that we were pioneers in, but completely given the go-by in execution. Because you can bribe the water supply board engineer who comes to the building, and he gives a certificate which says that this building is rainwater harvesting compliant, and it is not. That is just because they feel that it is easier for them to buy water over the year and not just put up one small facility at extra cost right up front. This is what is really of concern. And here you can't blame, it's actually the poor who bears the brunt of this whole water crisis, but it is actually the rich who contribute to it in maximum fashion.
So to take off from the bribery point that you raised, we are a state where our politics has been infused with social justice. We were pioneers in taking what were seen as certain progressive steps towards the empowerment of various castes and communities. We had a great deal of welfareism, which S. Narayan's written about in his recent book. which seem to have had a real impact on improving HDI and so on. But hand in hand, I think Transparency International, which I think you quote, has also called Tamil Nadu the third most corrupt state in India. So how badly has this sort of impacted us, do you think? Or do you think corruption just wheels the oils of business in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only, I'm not going to mention states where I have done work. And I would say that perhaps the volume of corruption here is very high. But there is a certain honesty in the corruption over here, where post the bribe, things happen. Whereas I have had experience in states where post the bribee, so to speak, the briber is left standing, the bribee has vanished, and nothing ever happens. And then, with inflation, you pay extra bribe the next year, hoping that some things would come your way. I do agree that corruption is a very major issue, but the social justice that Tamil Nadu has been able to mete out, I would say I don't know if there are any other states that have been able to match this record. Because for one, I think there's a lot of self-respect over here among people. Okay, it borders on arrogance sometimes, but I think there is a lot of people are aware of their value. And this, I think, is perhaps the greatest contribution of what social justice has done in the last, you take the first step was in 1920. So we got into social justice long before it was even dreamt of in other states. And I think from then till now, 102 years of it, I think we have had a lot of value add. And today you can't, I've had experience, particularly again and again, I go back to the north because that's where I lived. I've seen Bihar, I've seen Bengal. Bengal, for all its communism, one of the most feudal states possible. And the treatment of the neighboring states people who come in and the way they are handled, and same way with Bihar for that matter, or Uttar Pradesh, places that I have been to very often, sometimes too often. I would say that Chennai is far different on that. And that self-respect itself, in my opinion, amounts to a lot. And next you come to the healthcare indices. And you look at the mortality rates, you look at child welfare, women welfare. I think there is a lot to go for what has happened in this state. And then education. Because we have been consistently educating, people have been able to question injustices. I have not seen this happen I have seen it happen in Maharashtra, yes. I can't even say that it has happened in places like Gujarat.
Yeah, okay, I'm just going to play the devil's advocate here.
Please.
I'll grant you all of that there has been that, push in the economy, education, and they're all interlinked, education, economy, health. I mean, you can't segregate them, they go hand in hand. But what puzzles me in this, and that's a given, and I think that's a great achievement, I'm not taking anything away from that. But do you think some of the sort of larger ideological foundations of the movement, such as say rationalism, I don't see it anywhere. I mean, you go at every turning, there's a template.
I've mentioned it.
Yeah.
So,
such as rationalism, such as, if you like, casteism. I'm not sure whether we have any real reduction. I remember toting up the number of small caste parties which align themselves to one of the two major Dravidian formations about, I can't remember which election it was, about 10 years ago. And I don't think you have such a long laundry list in any other state. I mean, Congo, LLR, something party, this party, that party. So how well are we doing on fronts like this? I mean, this movement also embraced modernity, science, rationalism, a lack of casteism, and so on. So on those fronts, I just wonder whether, as much progress has been made. And if so, why? I mean, if there's been a lack of it, why?
I agree entirely with you on both counts. And my favorite example is of Periyar statue, which is at the head of Mount Road. And on the pedestal, it is written that those who believe in God are fools. Just 5 minutes away, there is this bodyguard Muniswarar Alayam, where every time a new car is brought, it is brought there, and then fruits are dumped on the road. Worship is done very formally.
Right.
It was the governor's bodyguard's temple.
Yeah.
But now it's become the bodyguard. It protects your body from accidents because you go there and worship. So this is how things have changed. And Justice Indira Banerjee of the High Court and now of the Supreme Court, I remember when she came here as Chief Justice, she said, to understand casteism in Tamil Nadu, you'll never be able to do it. She says it is so complicated. And she says there are so many castes and subcastes and micro castes going into it that it's a real madhouse. She didn't use the word madhouse, but that's clearly what she indicated. I agree entirely with that. But I would just go one step further. And I would say that rationalism has been a complete failure. I don't think it has taken off at all. And in fact, I would only say that there is hyper-religionism today. And I would also say that even our so-called politicians who claim to be rational, in the end, they all turned out to be religious people. So, for instance, this DMK ideologue Chinna Kuttusi, he used to say, who is a true rationalist? A man who doesn't pray in his last moments. He is a true rationalist because he doesn't believe in the existence of God or a higher phenomenon. But we've had instances of our elderly politicians suddenly sporting yellow, going and offering worship in temples, family members going on their behalf and offering worship and all that. So I would say that rationalism has just not taken off. Maybe it will in a very long period of time. Maybe 100 years is a very small framework to consider what's been going on for centuries over here. I don't know about that. The other aspect, which is, we spoke about, I'm sorry, one was religion, the other was rationalism, and the other was casteism. I think there is a lot of self-interest among many castes to keep the casteism intact. This is I'll be attacked for making this statement, I know for sure. But nobody really wants to give up on casteism at the end of the day. Everybody is happy with it. And it will remain as long as people are happy with it. Even those who decry the caste system would like the caste system to continue because only then they'll have something to decry. And this is not helped by the larger framework of today's vigilantism in religion, which is it's a phenomenon that's happened in the last 10 years. But why the vigilantism? Because of the continuous inroads that the church has been making through means that are more foul than fair at the end of the day. So, everybody is at fault. At the end of the day, I think, just this morning, strangely, and when I was doing my puja of all things, I was thinking to myself, religion is the greatest enemy of all people because this is where there's a root cause of all unhappiness. But the point is, we grew up in an environment where we were told that religion is your personal affair. It's something that you do at home. When you go to office, you don't talk about it. But today, it's completely changed. It's completely changed. In the last 10 years, I have seen it change in front of my eyes when religion has become something that everybody, and in this I'm including all religions, everybody now puts it up right in front like a barrier or a banner. And we have gone back to the era of the Crusades, where Chennai hasn't still come to that stage, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed and I hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah. So we're talking about contradictions between, an ideology and maybe the growth of religion or a non-casteist philosophy, and perhaps casteism hasn't gone there. In this respect, do you think there's another contradiction? Do you think Chennai is kind of stuck in an image trap? I ask this because it has this reputation, you yourself have referred to it just a few minutes ago, of being staid, conservative, lacking in cosmopolitanism, and so on. And you yourself, I think somewhere, have this wonderful quote by a stand-up comic which says, the most happening place in Chennai is Bangalore, which I thought was quite clever. So, the thing is, I used to hear very similar things when I was in the Hindu. People come and tell me, this paper is really conservative, it's old-fashioned. And this is something I used to counter by saying, look, we're anything but conservative politically and socially. I mean, you know, for instance,
currently you're politically incorrect.
yeah, well, that for instance, we're the first. Well, I'm no longer with the Hindu, so I can't speak for it. So I'm only talking about the time when I was there. We were the first mainstream newspaper to editorially at least support many modern causes, those that relate to freedoms of young people, LGBT causes, and so on. So this was never seen by those people as a counter, as a convincing counter to this. And I think this measure of cosmopolitanism that people held in their heads was, you know, how many pubs do you have? How much of nightlife do you have? How many upscale restaurants do you have serving different kinds of food and so on? So sometimes I wonder, given the many firsts and given just the history of the city and all the firsts that we talked about and the contributions we made, the Nobel Prizes won, all of it, we're actually a fairly modern city, but stuck in an image trap.
That's right. And I think we are not very bothered about getting out of the image trap, because I think it's a city that is ultimately very comfortable within its skin. It's happy to be where it is. It's not aspiring to be something else. And as you very rightly point out, it's the records that speak for themselves, and perhaps Chennai is very comfortable to let the records speak for themselves. Because for instance, the last chapter of the book, is about the 2015 floods and how the entire city came together in order to do something for, relief measure. It was much before the government actually woke up. In fact, the government was caught napping during those floods, as we all know. The point is, it was the people who really got together to do something about it. And at the end of it, as I have written once again, everybody went back to be doing whatever they were doing. They did not go back, they didn't hark back to what was happening. I keep thinking about Calcutta. Calcutta would have dined down on such an incident for 3 years, let me tell you. She flood holo, আমরা এরকম করলাম, সে করলাম, এই করলাম, একটা memorial build করতে হবে. All that we would have done in Calcutta. Chennai just went back to whatever it was doing. It was very matter of fact. Next year we had the cyclone. Once again, I remember people clearing their own colonies long before the corporation bulldozers. Bulldozer is something else. But the corporation machinery, shall I say, arrived and began to push things out of the way and took care of things. But the point here is that I think we are quite comfortable. It's like our industrialists. We don't need to grow beyond the point. We are doing well. Let's carry on the same way.
So this, as you said, is in your epilogue, the last. So this, as you said, was in the epilogue, the last chapter, which I noticed had this subtitle called "A City United." And maybe you were referring to things such as the floods when you say that. But you also have a couple of lines in that which suggests anything but unity. And I'll just read that out because I just took it down. It says that until a few years ago, you thought Chennai had risen about divisions, at least in public. And then you say, now I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Politicians, media, and about social media are spewing venom. And sadly, I see many Chennai people falling victim to this. All of a sudden, religious and caste divides have come to the fore. Can you expand on this? I mean,
it's just what I spoke a few minutes ago, where I see that today caste and religion has become everybody's business. And even on social media, people are divided on the basis of caste. So there is a group that follows only one person. There is a group that follows another person. There are pinned tweets. Today, I read an entire, then I wondered why I read it at the end of the day, but it just came and it caught my attention. There was a spoof on Muhammad the Prophet. And it was so insulting. I mean, I wouldn't want to even be thinking on those lines. So there is, for instance, what would happen if Shankara was to be, or Ramanuja was to be spoofed the same way? This is the whole thing. And there are people liking it and saying, yes, this is the right way to go about it. I would say that this is entirely wrong, because we were brought up, I think there was a vision, as you very rightly said right at the beginning, even in the 1920s and then post-independence, where we were told that we were one nation, one people, and we had to move in a direction where we were going to look at progress. But today we appear to be only looking at regression and how we can build a kind of a fortress for ourselves. And there is this whataboutery. So if you say that we ought not to be doing this, the question is, what about them? Now, do we want to become like them? That is the whole question. Our duty, I thought, was to set an example to get them to become better, whoever that them is. But the point is that today this has, I think it's the entire atmosphere is very greatly vitiated. And there was a time even 2 years ago when I used to tweet on things that I felt very strongly about. And then I realized that there's so much of hatred at the end of the day. Why get it?
So this is not about Chennai, but since you brought this
It's
up.
a pan-Indian thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just wonder whether it's a pan-world thing.
It is.
There's a lot of work now being done on social media and how algorithms are actually set up to divide people because of echo chambers and because of the way that advertising functions within the social media.
So we're all manipulated.
So we're all manipulated. Yeah, actually, we're all manipulated. We're all units of advertising. And in an insidious manner. Yeah, but this is possibly true. So I was just wondering whether you agree with that view.
I do. See, Chennai is not an island. It is subject to the same kind of forces that any other. But you still feel that.
But have you sort of? I mean, I've done this. I mean, there are many Chennai people who I've kind of regarded well and thought they were decent, upright people. And sometimes I read their social media posts and I just wonder where this venom and this bile is coming from. I mean,
I agree.
I don't, as a result, I don't tweet. Hardly.
I only tweet on things that make me happy to tweet about. That's it. I don't
Good for you.
go beyond that.
Yeah, complete agreement with that. So I'll just ask you one more last question before I pass it on. I noticed in your book, I mean, there's a wide variety of sourcing. There's, obviously books, there are articles, newspaper articles, there are primary sources and so on. You also you've done a lot of interviews, I think, or at least some of them with people in the city, industrialists.
Then rainwater harvesting, Shekhar Raghavan.
Yeah,
and so on.
rainwater harvesting, and then Mohan Raman, some doctors.
Dr. Vardarajan.
Dr. Vardarajan. And a couple of industrialists, Suresh
Yeah, Suresh Krishna, M.V. Subbaiah,
Subbaiah,
L. Lakshman.
Yeah, and Lakshman and so on. Now, I mean, you've done that, and I think I'm going to ask you two questions here. One is that, I mean, obviously they serve as points of information which expand the sort of range of your book. But as I was reading it, I also thought they lend a certain immediacy, a certain kind of, if you like, I can't think of a better expression, but a sort of personalized intimacy to the book, which I thought was a nice thing.
Thank you.
And so I wondered, first question is whether they were put there only for information, or was it put there to change the character of the book a little bit, make it a little more intimate. The second question is, there are Telugu sources used in the book. And I just wondered in that context, since you've relied on those, whether there is a paucity among people writing in Tamil Nadu, just using Tamil sources alone and not using Telugu sources. Maybe you can answer both these questions.
The first question, to answer the first question, this was a suggestion made by the editor, Pujita Krishnan. Okay. She said that you have to get first-person stories into the book, and then I had listed out names, and then we had a back and forth, and it was only after that I really went, and I'm glad that I think it only validates what Pujita had really thought of, and given her experience, I guess it was a very good add-on. The other aspect as regards the Telugu sources, I believe very strongly that in India, if you want to write on something Indian, you have to have the felicity to quote from multiple languages. Without that, you are not going to be able to give a story from its various perspectives. Certainly it cannot be on the basis of English writing, because English writing is very much in one direction. And certainly it cannot be just on the basis of Tamil writing as well. And increasingly, I find that people rely on just one language or the other. I was very lucky because, my father had a transferable job, and so I ended up becoming comfortable with 5 languages. And so I was able to use them wherever I've been. Not everybody is exposed to that. But the point is that if you need to be a researcher, you at least need to get them translated for you. For instance, I noticed Mr. Ramakrishnan was here from the Potti Sriramulu Library. There he is. The Telugu sources, it's a phenomenal library. Just next to the Vidya Mandir school. Nobody goes there. Nobody. In fact, he himself used to express this concern that it's just lost. It's in an ocean of Tamil. There is this Telugu library with publications going back to the 1920s, 1910s, and beautifully kept and made available for people, waiting for scholars to come who will one day go there and do their research. I'm very happy that you came today, sir, to this meeting. And so the point is that this is the kind of thing that we need to look at the Kupuswami Shastri Research Institute inside the Sanskrit College, the Swaminath Iyer Library in Besan Nagar, Kalakshetra, which is in Tamil. So these are all fantastic sources which give you parallel points of view or the same account. You begin to look at it from different points of view, and that is when I think you're able to really paint a very good picture. Certainly in my Carnatic music research, this multiple languages has been of great help. And I keep reading a lot in Tamil, and I keep wondering, why have these people not looked at Telugu? Why have they not looked at Sanskrit? What has happened to all those sources? We can't just give them the go by, At the end of the day, they are all written records of what happened, and multiple points of view maybe at the end of the day. And Chennai is uniquely placed because it's got storehouses for all this.
Will you just tell us, just one more question, it's just come to mind. Will you tell us, you've written so much in Musings about Chennai, but the way you describe the making of the book is somebody comes to you at the Hindu Lit Fest and actually suggests it. Why didn't it strike you on your own?
I'm very bad at these things, Mukund. Much of my life has been taking things as they come along. I'm very bad at planning, and I guess that is part of my mental makeup. I don't know. Maybe it's because I've been an only child where people took decisions at various moments in my life and said this, and then yes. So, my favorite story is about when I was around 12 and my father, one of those few serious fatherly conversations. He was phenomenal, but he wouldn't have serious conversations. And he said, what is it that you want to do when you grow up? And I told him I want to become a journalist. And in front of my eyes, this man wrinkled and grayed and withered, and he lost the control of his limbs, and then he sat down in a chair. Here was this powerful banker,
why I'm looking like this.
And then he took me into the corner and said, we are a middle-class family. I can still remember his words.
Be an engineer.
Be an engineer. Yeah. And so I became an engineer. I don't know at the end of the day, I don't know whether I was a good engineer or a bad engineer or a mediocre engineer, but I did. And then, it's a good question, but I'm hardly the kind who thinks, and I fortunately married somebody who thinks always ahead of me. And so now I have come under her guidance. And in the last 30 years, I'm very happy to be led. And so these things happen. So.
Wonderful. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Mukund, for being here and asking questions. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Yes, sir. Please.
No, I was just saying that I want to put your last two, points together and frame a question out of that. The lament about the resources not being put to use on one hand, and you taking to engineering because your father said, look, don't be a journalist. Are we at a stage of evolution in history where history studies and history as a vocation is given a go-by? And in your assessment as a historian of sorts, do you believe that there is a likelihood that it will come back as, the societal standard of living moves to a different order, and hence, we could start giving importance to something like history?
I agree entirely, and I hope that will happen, because that, I think, is really the need, or the what is really a crying need in our country. We are people who are today completely lacking in what I would call the soft skills, or the having a broader perspective of where we come from and where we are going. And I think it is because we are all people who, our generation grew up as engineers, accountants, doctors, lawyers, and so on, and we were not allowed to think of the other aspects of, broader thinking. And I feel that has to come back. But saying all that, both my children turned out to be very strong, conservative, straight-laced, But I didn't, and neither did my wife. We didn't guide them, but they just went in that direction. That's about it. But the point here is that I think it is very important at the end of the day that we have a broader perspective. And I also feel that we need to create a cushion where people can survive very well as people in those professions, which I think really doesn't exist at this point of time. So what happens is they look at brilliant minds and successes like, say, Dr. A.R. Venkatachalapathy. And then, people want to become like him. But nobody looks at the struggles that Venkatachalapathy must have been through to become what Venkatachalapathy is today. So that, I think, is where there is this rigor is completely lacking in making people understand what happens if you take history, or what happens if you take what are called social studies, which I think is very wrong as a terminology. But what happens if you take to that as a career? There has to be some kind of a counseling at the end of it to show people what they can aspire to become, what are all the, ultimately in any profession, it's only the most brilliant who will be at the top. The others are not going to, they may be at the middle order, but they're not going to reach the top. That's forgiven. But I think there has to be some system whereby this is encouraged. I don't see it happening as of now, but I'm hopeful that it will sometime.
So, Sriram, you mentioned that our state has excelled in both education as well as health sector compared to other states. I think all of us can endorse with that. So, is it the credit the full credit goes to the ruling parties post-independence, or were these seeds sown by the British era? So, who can take maximum credit?
Shall I would say that it's the beginning is with the Christian missionaries. I think they began this whole thing in the 1850s when they made education available to everybody. And they may have had other motives as to why they were making education available to everybody. But it had a beneficial effect, certainly. People grew up, people began to question as to why. And I think that is when the seeds of education really, begin to bear fruit. That's the first step. For instance, if you read Rettai Srinivasan's biography, the great, Dalit leader, you find that he says that in a school, he was the only Dalit among 400 other students. At the turn of in the last, I'm talking about the 19th century, in Coimbatore. And so education was made available and some took advantage of it. And they became the leaders who then began to challenge. Now, that is the first step. Then you have next is the meal scheme, the noon meal scheme, which is not M.G. Ramachandran.
Which is Srinivasan's.
Huh?
Which is Srinivasan.
No, it is Ayodhyadas Panditer, his brother-in-law. Ayodhyadas Panditer is the one who really starts the free meal scheme in 1904. For what were called Adi Dravida schools in Madras. Adi Dravida being the term then for the Dalits of later years. So that is when the phenomenon, look at it, 1904, somebody had the vision to say that, these children are not going to be able to eat, they will not be able to, so this food is what is going to attract them to come to school. So that really starts the whole thing. Then in 1911, you have Kuruchi Rangasamy Iyengar starting it in the Hindu Theological School. So now you have the economically backward caste Hindus coming into school because they are able to get food. And so on. In 1927, the Corporation of Madras becomes the first corporation to begin public schools. So slowly, then Kamraj comes in the 1960s and much later MGR. So I would say that a lot has happened over the years. And even in the 1940s, this was a center of education. So we need to give credit to the vision that really, brought forth the whole thing in the 19th century. But we must also give credit to the fact that there was a lot of sustaining it in later years. There can be a lot of criticism about what happened, how things are run. But I have a very positive bent of mind, and I would say that at the end of the day, the report card is on the positive. It's not on the negative.
Vanakkam, Sriram sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Vijay, don't ask any difficult questions which I don't have answers.
No, I want to ask you a question in English and a question in Tamil.
Seri.
இப்படி ஒரு கதம்பமா அவியல் எழுதுற புக் ஈஸியா இல்ல ஒரு ஸ்பெசிபிக் சப்ஜெக்ட் எழுதுறது ஈஸியா? யூ ஆல்வேஸ் பிக் த ஈஸி வே அவுட், ஐ ஃபீல், பை டிஷிங் அவுட் தீஸ் அவியல்ஸ். rather than, like Mutaya said, how do you pick up these topics? The second question.
Which topic?
These kind of varied topics.
Yeah.
Each chapter is an essence by itself. So when you prepare for writing such books, how do you prepare? Is just random collation, or how do you pick it up? The second one is, I'll take you up on the Christian missionary, because there's just one thing. It was not in the 19th century. The Danish Trankebar mission is an official quote where they say that we've been trying to give them education and trying to convert them for 20 years. There's this actual note that goes back and said, weekends they go back to worshipping their stone gods. And I would say that the intent might be different, but end of the day we got education.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I agree that the Trankebar mission is really the pioneer from 1707.
And the British basically took over our temples, and they were reprimanded by the head office in London saying, don't play wet nurse to Vishnu. Thank you. So please tell us, how do you prepare to write these books?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sir.
an easier question to answer at the end of the day. You know, I perhaps because I'm not I was not trained to write in that sense, right? Because it just, you know, in the sense that I did not, you know, I just had a hobby, I had a passion to start writing. And when I came here, and then I initially started writing on Carnatic music. That was really my first topic of, you know, for the first 2 or 3 years, I think between 1995 and 1999, I was only writing Carnatic music and Carnatic music history. Then I realized that if you needed to write Carnatic music history, you had to understand the history of Madras. So I started researching on the history of Madras. And then Mr. Mutaya one day walked into my life and said that, you know, you hereafter you will write for Madras musings. Now, Madras musings, it was a challenge, because every 15 days, before you closed your eyes and opened your eyes, you had to churn out around 5,000 words on various topics in order to keep the publication going. He was quite capable of doing it, so I had to also rise to the challenge. And so that is when various topics I began to cover on the city. I would have still not looked at corporate biographies or business histories had it not been for Mr. Lakshman of Rane. One day in 2006, he just called me into his office and said that I'd like you to write the history of Rane. And I said, I have never done this. You know, I've only been writing on arts. What do you want me to write about a business history? And I still remember his words. He said, you run a business? I said, yeah, I run a business. You pay dividends? I said, I pay dividends. So you make a profit every year, don't you? I said, yes, I do make a profit. You know, touch wood. Then what's your difficulty? So then, and you've done an MBA. So I said, yes, I have. So then I decided I could write it. So I started writing that biography, and that's how it started. So gradually, multiple areas of interest really came into my gamut of writing, and that is how I was able to do this. Otherwise, your way of writing is very difficult. It requires a lot more rigor than mine, I must say that. Incidentally, for those who don't know, Vijay is the man who has been single-handedly fighting for the bringing back of idols that have been stolen from India. And he's written a book called Idol Thief, which is among my favorite books.
We had an event here on that
subject. And Vijay lives in Singapore, and he's fought some of the... Oh, you now live here? Oh, you moved here? And he's fought some of the biggest vested interests in the trade single-handedly and still continues. It's a phenomenon.
Yes.
Sujata?
First, as an outsider of Madras, I wanted that book should be Biography of Madras. This is a statement only. Then my question is, you told that everybody is believes in casteism. Do you believe? Then how can you generalize that everybody wants to hold a placard of religion like that?
You just have to go out and see what is happening.
No, I don't do that. You
don't
do
that. I don't do it, but we are a minority of 0.0000000.
So you can't generalize.
Maybe not. But the broad trend is in that direction only.
I don't think it is.
I disagree very strongly on that count. And I think at heart, all of us are casteists at the end.
But I am not. And I know you are also not.
When the test comes, we'll see whether we can pass.
Okay, thank you. But as an outsider, I would have loved to name a book, Biography of Madras.
on the name.
Yes.
You know, I'm a very non-argumentative.
No, you have explained, but I don't belong to Madras.
I
That's
agree.
why.
I agree, but
That's
you know,
why.
I'm a very non-argumentative fellow.
That's why.
Now, nobody can raise a question. It's the official name of the city. They won't waste their time fighting on the cover. They'll at least fight about the content of the book, which is a much
That's
different
what.
With Chennai industrialists has been valid up to a point of time. But if you take the average youngster of Chennai today, his reference point is Girish Mathrubootham, maybe a Sridhar Vembu,
I agree.
or those names.
Yes.
I'm not saying he's not looking at the larger groups, they are for value systems and ethics and all that. So do you think Chennai has really changed in that perspective? And it will change further?
It's too early, in my opinion, which is why I didn't write about it. I felt that this is all that has been happening in the last 10 years. How will it sustain at the end of the day? I don't know. So I just brought it up to a point where, you know, I left it with the IT industry coming in. And beyond that, I didn't take it up because I feel that we still need to show that we are a startup capital and that we can sustain it in the long term. The figures are abysmally low at this point of time, as you know. One Girish Mathrubootham, one Sridhar Vembu does not make an entire IT, a startup ecosystem. But if it happens 5 years from now, I'll be the happiest person to add something on that.
Sir, I have two questions. In fact, I'm reading your book. I have just crossed a few chapters. In one of the chapters, especially when this bomb was dropped in, I think somewhere near High Court, you had given the diary account of a few persons. It will be very interesting to see day by day what has happened in Chennai, and especially people who are vacating Chennai. How did you land on all those resources? That is number one. Second thing is, I'm not very clear why the British focus shifted from Chennai to Calcutta. Somewhere I think you are saying that we lost the the luster, and then slowly they started moving out. So any background material, anything you have?
Okay, both of them. See, the first thing is, I read a lot. And in the last 25 to 30 years, I have restricted my reading to only what pertains to my business and to the history of Chennai and Carnatic music. Beyond that, I don't read. People send all kinds of books. In fact, every day some books arrive. But what I know that I cannot read, I put it away, and then it makes its way as gifts, etc., etc. So over the years, I have built up a very substantial library on Madras-based books. Because my profession, my business is such that I cannot spend time going looking for references. I cannot go and spend days in the archive, and it's just not possible for me. I need to have everything at hand. So I have invested in this over the years, and there is a large library of books at home. And one of the particularly the day-by-day diary account comes from the diary of N.D. Varadacharya. This was published in 2004, when, I think 2004, I may be wrong, but I remember vaguely, his children, he died in the 1940s, incidentally. Shortly after the Second World War, the man passed away. His wife lived up to the age of 104 and died just a few years ago. The children decided to bring out the diaries as a book, and it's a very interesting book. In fact, Mukund himself was asking about it.
Yeah, so it was not when the Exodus took place. The bomb was in October 43.
Yeah.
By then, there was no real problem. It was just a...
In fact, the irony is that when the bomb fell, there was a power cut lasting for 1 week or something, and so nobody knew that a bomb had fallen on the city.
The panic was in 42. Yeah, but he has another question.
Yeah. The thing about Calcutta versus sheer bribery, opportunities to earn income in an illegal fashion. The possibility for earning in Bengal was several times higher than what it was over here. And everybody went. Clive was, of course, the leader. And at the end of it, of course, in Parliament, as you know, he said he was amazed at his own moderation in what he had earned. So that was his defense at the end of the day. So just that the pickings were far richer because it was such a fertile province that, they could make money hand over fist. And that was the simple reason why they decided to move from here and went there. And even yesterday I was mentioning it, Chennai that way had never had a godfather. Bengal had it with the East India Company right till 1911. And then, Bombay was the favored son because every investment was pumped into Bombay because of the cotton boom, and they made it the financial capital. This was the neglected city. But this stood up. It fought for itself. It asserted itself repeatedly, and it turned out to be very successful at the end of the day.
Yes, Sriram, I would just add here that I think you're right about neglect vis-a-vis Bombay and Calcutta. But even if you look at the turn of the century, the Viceroy was ruling presidencies, and the Madras presidency was hugely important. I don't think it was any less important than the Bombay or anything else.
I beg to differ on that.
No, I think okay.
Only on two counts. One is the famine of 1875, when already we were a presidency capital and there were millions dying over here. And the Duke of Buckingham and Chandos wants relief measures to be brought in. Lytton arrives from Calcutta as Viceroy and then writes letters back to his wife about how the entire famine is a sham and people are not dying. We've got photographs today of people dying, and we've seen how emaciated they were, how many died, and how it transformed the city itself. But he refused to give money, which is when the Buckingham Canal had to be dug as a work for relief measure. This was the first one. The second was the construction of the harbour. The demand for a construction of a harbour begins in 1836. Until 1876, for 40 years, the imperial government in Calcutta refuses to sanction money for Madras to get a harbour. We were operating with catamarans going into the sea, with ships offloading. Everything, including railway engines, were brought in through rafts. 13-ton railway engines were being brought in by catamarans from the ships to the city because there was no harbour. And only when there was a recession in steel in England did they decide that they would begin investing in the harbour over here, because they thought that, all the structures, the pier would be built on by steel and things. So it was, they willfully, in fact, the chairman of the Madras Chamber of Commerce, I forget his name now, he says this is the Cinderella among the three presidencies. We will never get money and we have to somehow manage on our own. We consistently fought against this.
Sorry?
We were denied many things.
We'll take this discussion offline. I have a different view. But who is next?
We are conservative, but I mean, as people who didn't live in Chennai, we moved in only 13 years ago. There's also a lot of myths about Chennai that are floating around beyond Chennai. I'm wondering whether an audience like this should actually do some systematic myth busting, because it is going to, I'm telling you, it's going to affect our talent attraction. I mean, today you don't have data scientists in this city, whereas we have great data scientists in the city. You put them in Bangalore and you have 10% attrition per month, and you put them there. And I'm wondering if the leaders of the city should actually do some systematic myth busting. Otherwise, we'll become what Cleveland became, the mistake on the lake, right? There's Chicago and Cleveland, both great industrial cities. One is sort of the center of everything, and one became the mistake. So should we just be content with, oh, this is who we are, this is our image, or we frankly get together and do something?
No, I agree with you entirely, because I face this problem on a day-to-day basis in my hydraulics business. You can recruit any number of hydraulic engineers in Bangalore. You don't even get a biodata in Chennai.
Okay, so we'll just take two more questions.
We fought for water. As far as I know, I think I've lived long enough to see that the water slabs in Chennai have gone down to the levels of what they were in Coimbatore already 20 years ago. You do not get water until about 200 meters or so. And water is a scarce resource, and it is becoming very dangerous. What is it that the government can do, or what is it that the people can do? See, rainwater harvesting is only when the rains are there. And again, that has not been, the good idea of Sekhar Raghavan has not been taken up seriously, and even if it is taken up, it has not been implemented properly by most of the builders and all that. So what is it that the city should do, for instance, because the population is growing, the water slabs are going down. What is the possibility of the seawater? See, this is something which, there are two ideas which have not been implemented properly by the scientists of our country. Thanks to, I belong to the Department of Atomic Energy. Therefore, I can tell you, atomic energy took away all the money for building the MAPP kind of things. They did not spend time on solar energy and ocean energy. These are two energies which are abundant with such a huge coast which we have. But somehow our scientists have not been pushed in that direction to develop anything
which is viable. We should have been world leaders for solar power. We should have been world leaders for ocean energy. But I don't think we have been. What is your take on what I have said?
Those are national questions, but I'll go back to your point on the water. We do have desalination plants here in the city. There are 3 of them, incidentally, today, which are transforming seawater and then giving it to, for consumption. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, why dismiss Shekhar Raghavan's idea? I mean, why not get builders to become ethical? That is the whole thing. See, there is nothing more that the people can do. If we are going to be unethical and we don't store water, then we don't deserve to exist as a city. That is the whole point.
You have hit at the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Ethics is totally lacking.
Yeah. So that has to change, right? Otherwise,
we speak of high morals, but when it comes to personal life, don't do what I do. Do what I say.
but that is, as I said, it's more a national issue. And in the city is no different when it comes to that. So we can't, I think that is where the transformation has to really happen. And it will, hopefully. I live in hope.
Okay.
Take one last question.
Last question from the back, please.
Yeah, mine is also a slightly big picture question, is how to accelerate the importance of reading and writing in the classroom. Because right now the new education policy, should it give it more importance? Because as we begin to compete with companies overseas, some of the architects who work with me, my colleagues, they are technically very good. But when it comes to communication or writing, we are kind of still lacking. It's changing actually between when we were in school and right now when my daughters are in school. There is some importance given to writing and reading, but how is it to be accelerated? Any thoughts? Or
I would only say that as a city, we need to invest consistently in soft skills, in getting children particularly, to communicate and to read and write. Parents have a very important role to play in this whole thing, but the point is, the bulk of the children probably come from a strata of society where they are the first generation school goers. So where is the question of parents, playing an important role in the whole thing? They may not be even capable of doing it. But that is where I think the school system really has. And what is amazing is that there is a hell of a lot of material in the corporation schools. In fact, today I would say that the corporation schools are very well run in this city. Phenomenal. I've been to several of them. And I find that the facilities that they have is just wonderful. It's just that there is no constructive method of harnessing what is available in order to benefit the children. The children and the teachers just assume that this is yet another thing that has to be gone through in a step towards the future. But I agree that most people come out with abysmal communication skills, abysmal writing skills. And it's not only in English, Tamil is even worse. Yes.
One more point I would like to make on the solar energy you have been making. See, in 1980, their Metro Chemicals started manufacturing polysilicon, and they have been successful in bringing out a very good material with the help of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and they were able to make about 1 ton per month, something like that, to that extent. Indira Gandhi was very keen on taking the material forward, and she sent one of her secretaries to Chennai. And that gentleman, who happens to be known to me quite well, he said, I would like to go and see the plant. So can you help that? So I talked to the managing director, the then managing director of Mr. R.V. Ramani. He's still there now. See, he said, yes, you are the best man, you take him, you show him the play around. And when he reported, Indira Gandhi cancelled the order, 100 metric tons placed on American, US government, and she immediately cancelled the order and started ask Metcam Silica to produce. But unfortunately, the Tamil Nadu government did not cooperate. They were not given special power. It is a highly power consuming industry, and they were not given power. And Indira Gandhi passed away soon after, and there was nobody to push the matter through. And Mr. Shankar, who took over Metcam Silicon, was not interested in running the company at last. Unnecessarily, why should he be running this one for the loss? So the entire plant has been stopped and it has been closed. And they used the facility what they had to produce silica powder, fumed silica, which has got where they were making a lot of money. So the government also should give some incentive for a new ideas to promote, and they should look ahead instead of looking down.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My mind went back to 2015, and some of the directors are present here. When we started CIC and conceptualized it, how exactly this should function, one of the charter points was we need to energize the intellectual quotient of Chennai. I think that we have achieved today by this very deep and insightful discussion on exactly what Chennai stands for. The conservatism part, I know there's enough pros and cons around it, but I think what is really important from today as a takeaway is that Chennai is really growing very fast. It's a much more livable place than what it was a few years back or a few decades back. The youngster in Chennai today looks at Chennai differently from what we say, Andagalatla concept now. Slightly has to be given a go by probably, because the way he is looking at Chennai. But really thankful to the audience. In fact, we would have liked this hall to be full, but we console ourselves every time by saying the hall is not full. It's a quality audience, so that to that extent, we have achieved the objective. But I really must thank both Mukund and Sriram for having putting this together in a very nice and in a very interactive fashion. A book generally can become very dreary, but they managed to evince a lot of interest and sort of attention of the audience here. Thank you, Mukund, for moderating this session, and thank you, Sriram, for this wonderful opportunity for us to listen to your story of Chennai. We are still contemplating what event to have in May. It's still work in progress. We'll come back to you as to through emails and other correspondence what is going to be the format of the May event. Thank you, one and all, and have a nice evening.